Tonight, I want to tell you a story. It's about desperation, about a choice someone made in the absolute dead of a Michigan winter. And it's a story that reminds us that some deals, once you make them, well, they can never really be undone.
You've heard it a million times, right? Easy money. It always has a price. But sometimes that price is a kind of stain on your soul you can never, ever wash away.
So our story kicks off with this guy named Ben. He's 30, a freelancer, just bouncing from one gig to the next. And as that December cold was cutting right to the bone, his bank account was pretty much empty. He was desperate, looking at eviction right in the face.
So what does he do? He finds himself scrolling through that digital back alley of the internet, Craigslist. Yeah, you know the place. It's a mess of used couches, sketchy apartment ads, and every once in a while, a little glimmer of false hope. And that's exactly where he saw it. This strange, really vague job listing that was about to change everything. But what really stopped him dead in his tracks? The pay. $1,000 for every single contract he signed. Oh, and plus, a 1% profit share. Now, to a guy who has nothing, this feels like winning the lottery. It's the kind of money that makes you start ignoring all the warning signs. The job itself sounded completely ridiculous, almost harmless. Some guy named Victor wanted him to find houses with the right energy so he could install these little stone guardian angel statues in their front yards. I mean, it sounded like some silly scam, right? But for that kind of cash, Ben was more than willing to play along. So the job takes him to the edge of town, to this isolated retirement community that was built back in the 70s. And the whole place was just off. The streets were way too clean, the old wooden houses just stood there, totally silent, and the air itself felt heavy, still. It was one of those places where you feel like time just stopped moving. And that's when he met Victor, a thin man, maybe in his 50s, and dressed way, way too formally for the shabby neighborhood they were in. We're talking a turtleneck, a wool coat, gold-rimmed glasses. But it was his eyes that Ben never forgot. They were sharp, intrusive, and just unsettlingly focused. Now, Victor's instructions, they weren't simple. Nope, they came with a set of really strange, very specific, and what seemed like totally nonsensical rules that made the whole thing feel even more bizarre. Okay, so there were 3 big rules. First, the house had to be detached. Okay? Second, it had to be at least 30 years old. And third, this is the weirdest one, it could only be lived in by 1 or 2 elderly people. The logic? Ben couldn't see it at all. And when Ben actually asked him why, Victor gave him this mystical, new agey explanation. He started talking about how recent crimes in the area were caused by a disruption in the geomagnetic flow, and the statues, he said, would stabilize the currents and make everyone safe again. It was complete and utter nonsense. But Ben chose to believe his own story. He looked at that empty bank account and just told himself, look, this is a harmless, legal job. It's just some silly little scam to help a weird old guy sell his statues. He just shoved all his doubts way, way down. But that creepy stillness of the community didn't last. Pretty soon, it turned into real unease. Late one night, Ben heard a weird sound. It was a man's voice, kind of muffled, but you could still make it out, just repeating 2 words over and over. He actually managed to record it. Stop. Stop. Even with all the strangeness, the job was a huge success. In less than a week, Ben signed 8 contracts. And just like that, $8,000 hit his account. The money was real, and man, it was intoxicating. It makes it really, really easy to ignore everything else. But then Victor added a new condition. After every installation, Ben had to give him a full report on the residents. We're talking names, ages, health conditions, even their daily habits. Was the homeowner an early sleeper? Did they go out of town a lot? The questions were getting alarmingly specific. And the pieces started to just slam into place when he went to the house of a resident named Stevens. The guy reacted with just pure hostility, screaming right in Ben's face. And his words just sent this ice-cold chill down Ben's spine. His tone, his voice, it was identical to the recording. Stevens was the one who'd been warning him. Ben tried to just brush it off, just a cranky old guy. But he could not shake this feeling of absolute dread. And pretty soon, that dread was confirmed by the local news. A very dark pattern was starting to emerge in that quiet little community. First, an elderly woman's home gets broken into while she's asleep. A few days later, another burglary. Then a third. And this one made Ben's blood run cold. The house that got hit was one of the exact locations where he had just installed a guardian angel.
He scrambled to find a map, frantically marking every house he'd visited, every single statue he'd placed. Then, he marked the locations of the recent burglaries. The pattern was undeniable. The overlap was almost perfect, and the horrifying truth just crashed down on him. All the mystical talk, the bizarre rules, the invasive questions about people's habits, suddenly it all made this terrible, sickening kind of sense. So, what was Victor's real plan?
Those statues, they weren't there for protection. They weren't meant to stabilize any kind of energy. The angels, they weren't guardians. They were markers, placed right in the front yards of vulnerable, elderly people. A signpost for thieves in the night, pointing the way to the easiest targets. And Ben? Well, he wasn't a salesman. He was the scout. He was the one sent in to gather all the intel, to pinpoint the weaknesses, to make sure the whole operation went off without a hitch. He was an unwilling architect of all this terror. And as if to just seal his fate, a notification goes off on his phone. A bank transfer. $3,000, with a little note attached. Profit share. This wasn't a bonus. This was blood money. It was his percentage of the profits that were earned from the fear and the violation of the very same people he'd spoken to, the homes he'd cased. The weight of that money was just crushing. Absolutely crushed by guilt, Ben knew he had to do something. He went back to one of the crime scenes thinking maybe he could gather some evidence. And that's when this story twists from a tale of simple crime into something much, much darker. As he got close to the house, something caught his eye. The guardian angel statue he'd put there. Its eyes were wet. He moved in closer and saw it wasn't rain, it wasn't grime. It was this thick, black, oily liquid streaming from its stone eye sockets, like tears of tar. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold just raced down his spine. And this one single terrifying thought forced its way into his mind. The angel was crying. It could not bear the crimes it had been forced to witness. This wasn't just a marker anymore, it was an omen. That supernatural horror, that was the final push. Ben knew he couldn't live with what he had done. He had to end it, no matter what the consequences were for him. His debt had to be paid. So, he went to the police. He told them absolutely everything, handed over every note, every contract, and that damning map that connected Victor's whole operation to the string of burglaries. Victor was arrested pretty soon after that, and the crimes, they stopped. But Victor's story didn't end with a trial. A few days later, Ben saw it on the news. Victor had taken his own life while he was in police custody. And the way he did it was uniquely, indescribably horrific. Victor had stabbed out his own eyes with a pen. The image of that crying statue, its stone eyes weeping black tears, just flashed in Ben's mind. The curse of the angel, it seems, had claimed the eyes of the man who had defiled its purpose. Even though he wasn't charged, Ben was reprimanded by the police for his recklessness. He closed his bank accounts and took out all $11,000 that he had earned from his terrible work. He went back to that quiet community and he personally compensated every single victim whose home he had marked. Now, it didn't earn him any forgiveness. He still had to deal with their cold, suspicious stares, but it was the only way he could even begin to ease the crushing weight of his guilt. Ben left that town and he never looked back, but he carried that lesson with him. He learned that the lure of easy money can make you completely blind to the truth, and the price for that blindness is always far, far higher than any contract. So the next time you see an offer that seems just a little too good to be true, remember Ben and the crying angel. What price are you willing to pay? If you want to explore more bargains with the dark, go ahead and like and subscribe. We'll be waiting for you.
You know, sometimes the most innocent gifts, they can carry the darkest secrets. This is the story of a car that was supposed to celebrate a bright future, but instead, it dug up someone else's horrifying past.
It was supposed to be a symbol of their freedom, a ticket to their brand new life.
they had no idea it was hiding someone else's final, terrifying moments. Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off on a really happy note. It's all about these two twin sisters, Ira and Daria, who are right on the brink of the biggest adventure of their lives. So, these two have always been super close, and last September was just an incredible time for them because they both got accepted into the exact same university. To celebrate this huge deal, their parents bought them a used car, and it looked like it was in perfect condition. The sisters were absolutely thrilled. I mean, they were driving to campus together every single day. This car, it was like their ticket to a whole new life, you know? A symbol of this amazing future they had stretched out in front of them. But, yeah, that feeling of excitement, it was not gonna last. This is where things start to get weird. It all began when their class schedules changed, and they had to start driving separately. And that's the key. Because the really strange stuff, it only seemed to happen when one of them was in the car all alone. A really weird pattern started to pop up. One of the sisters would be driving along, and boom, the engine just dies. For no reason. Full tank of gas and everything. Or the speedometer would go totally haywire, jumping from 0 all the way to max. Then there was the radio. It would just erupt with this blast of loud, piercing static. At first, they just kind of brushed it off. You know, glitches, it's an old car, right? But here's the really crucial part. It never ever happened when they were driving together, only when one of them was alone. So pretty soon, these little warnings, they stopped being just weird mechanical problems. They weren't just noises or glitches anymore. They became something you could see. Picture this. One night, Ira is walking home late from a friend's house. As she gets closer to the car, it's parked under these dim parking lot lights, and her heart just slams against her ribs because she can clearly see a dark silhouette just sitting there, right in the driver's seat. Her mind immediately jumps to carjacker. She just starts screaming for help, running at the car to try and scare them off. Her friends come running over, and with them there, she finally gets up the courage to yank the car door open. And it's empty. Just empty. Nobody inside. No signs of a break-in, nothing. Her friends tried to calm her down, saying she was just tired, you know, that it was probably a trick of the light, a shadow from a tree or something. And in that moment, she really desperately wanted to believe them. But then, just a few days later, her sister Daria comes home, and she is pale and visibly trembling. She'd seen the exact same figure after leaving the library late at night. Now they knew this wasn't a coincidence. But when they told their parents, they just brushed it off. Their mom literally told them they needed to stop staying up late watching horror movies. Their dad just blamed it on overactive imaginations. So now, the sisters are completely on their own, trapped with this fear that is getting more and more real. After their parents dismissed them, the sisters just kind of stopped talking about the shadow, for a while at least. But then, new things started appearing. And these weren't just shadows or weird noises. These were things they could actually touch, things they could no longer explain away. It all started one weekend. They decided to give the car a really good, deep cleaning. You know, a totally normal, boring chore. But this was the moment that absolutely everything changed for good. So Ira is vacuuming out the car. She's getting in all the gaps, reaching down into that narrow little space between the driver's seat and the center console. And that's when she feels it. Something tangled up in the seat mechanism. She pulls it out, and it's a clump of hair. Long, dark brown hair. And she knew, instantly, it wasn't hers. And it wasn't her sister's. And we're not talking about just a few loose strands here. This was a thick clump. And to her absolute horror, it even had a small piece of dried, hardened scalp attached to it. Just think about that. A deep, sick feeling started to settle in her stomach, but she kept cleaning, trying to force that image out of her head. Okay, so then she moves over to the passenger side and lifts up the floor mat to vacuum underneath. And she just freezes. Spread across the carpet is a large, dark brown stain. She calls Daria over, and her sister's face just goes white. Daria tries to explain it away, you know. Maybe the old owner's hair got caught, or maybe they just spilled coffee. But her voice was trembling. They both knew they were just lying to themselves. This car was turning into a coffin on wheels. And the final, sickening piece of the puzzle fell into place during a camping trip. This was the discovery that would confirm their absolute worst fears. So they're loading their camping gear into the trunk. Daria lifts up one of those little divider panels at the bottom to try and make more space, and as she does, one single tiny object falls out and clatters onto the floor. It was a fingernail, painted bright pink. Now, you have to understand, both sisters had worked part-time at a nail salon. They knew exactly what fake acrylic nails looked like. This one was real.
And the details, they were just sickening. At the base of the nail, there was still a tiny piece of human skin attached, and it had these dried, dark brown streaks on it. Daria just screamed and threw it on the ground, bursting into tears. Ira felt so sick, she honestly thought she was going to throw up right there.
Later that night, as they were lying in their tent, it all just clicked. Everything. The glitches that only happened when they were alone, the silhouette in the driver's seat, the clump of hair with the piece of scalp, the giant stain, and now the fingernail. She had this one terrifying thought. This car wasn't haunted. It was the scene of a horrific crime.
And you'd think that would be the end of the horror, right? But it wasn't. The discovery led to a whole new kind of terror. And this time, the conflict wasn't with some ghost in the car. It was between the two sisters.
See, when they got home, Ira was adamant, we have to call the police, now. But Daria was just paralyzed with fear. She was like, are you crazy? What if the killer finds out we reported it? What if they come after us? I don't want anything to do with this. She literally begged her sister to just forget they ever saw any of it.
And that's where we are, trapped. Every day, Ira looks out her window at that car parked on the street, and she gets this chilling feeling that the dark shadow is sitting right there, in the driver's seat, just watching. The sisters are completely trapped, and the silence, the not knowing, it's eating them alive. So the question is, what are they supposed to do now? That question just hangs there, doesn't it? A chilling reminder that some doors should never, ever be opened. If this story chilled you to the bone, make sure to show your support and subscribe for more tales from the dark.
They say Christmas is a time for family. For an addict, it's the most terrifying time of the year. You know, for 6 long years, that's all I was, an addict. And heroin, well, it wasn't just a habit, it was a thief. It just slowly, piece by piece, stole everything I was. My job, gone. The music I loved, silenced. Friends just stopped calling. And then finally, my family. I was completely alone in Portland, and my entire world had shrunk down to just one single screaming question: where do I get the next fix? And the holidays, let me tell you, they were the absolute worst. As Christmas got closer, this really strange thing would happen in my world. All the dealers, the other users, poof, they'd just vanish. It was like they were all returning to this other life, this life I used to have, going home to be with family. But for me, that quiet, that wasn't peaceful. It was a countdown to a death sentence. It meant the sickness was coming, that violent, body-shaking withdrawal, and I knew I was going to have to face it all alone. So, it's December 23rd, and my girlfriend walks out. She takes our entire holiday supply, 15 grams of opium, and pretty much anything else of value. The next 24 hours were just a cold, desperate blur, pounding the Portland pavement, calling every burnout I knew. By Christmas Eve, all I had was a measly half a gram, barely enough to keep the shakes away. And then, Christmas morning, it hit. It always does. It starts deep in your bones, this awful ache. Then the tremors start, and then this wave of nausea, so powerful you feel like you're being torn apart from the inside. So I'm back on the phone, calling everyone all over again, my voice just cracking with panic. And just when I think, this is it, it's over, my phone buzzes. It was the skinny dealer we called Rat. He's mumbling something about a guy named George, says he might be willing to front me a few grams if I can get over there. I didn't care who George was, I didn't care about anything. All I needed was that address. That address was my only hope in the world. So I get a taxi, and when we pull up to the address, I was floored. I was expecting, a grimy slum, some sketchy apartment building, but instead I'm staring at this beautiful 3-story house in a quiet suburb, all lit up with these warm, welcoming Christmas lights. Nothing about it made any sense. And then the door opens. And this guy, George, he didn't look like any dealer I'd ever met in my life. He looked like a lawyer, maybe a successful businessman. He was so polite. His voice was soft. He invites me inside, and the whole scene, the warmth, the normalcy, it was just deeply, deeply unsettling. It was the complete opposite of the dirty, desperate world I was living in. He gives me a little bit, right there in his living room, just enough to stop the shaking, to quiet the screaming in my muscles.
And as that familiar warmth starts to spread through me, that horrible desperation just melts away. For a second, just 1 second, sitting there by his big, roaring fireplace, smelling his fresh pine Christmas tree, I almost forgot why I was there. I almost let myself feel safe. But as soon as the drugs had settled me, George sits down next to me on this plush sofa. He puts his hand on my knee, and his touch was surprisingly soft. "There's something I want you to help me with," he says, and his voice is still just as calm. And then he stands up and just gestures for me to follow him. Upstairs. He leads me down this long, quiet hallway to a bedroom at the very end. And the room, it was perfect, like something out of a home decor magazine. But the air was thick with this bizarre cocktail of smells. I could smell the sweet perfume, and I could definitely smell the sharp chemical tang of heroin. But underneath all that, there was something else, something foul. It was faint, but it was unmistakable. It was the smell of rotting meat. Before my brain could even process what was happening, George just rips his coat off. He's standing there in nothing but his underwear, and that polite, calm expression, gone, completely gone, replaced by this sick, hungry look in his eyes. He started muttering these weird compliments about my body, and then he said it. "Satisfy me, and the drugs are yours." This wave of pure disgust just washed over me, colder and sharper than any withdrawal I'd ever felt. I stammered something about needing to leave, but he was fast. He moved right in front of the door, blocking my only way out. And then he lunged. His hands grabbed my shirt, trying to drag me to the bed. And we start wrestling. All that polite charm was gone, replaced by this desperate, almost animalistic strength. Now, I was taller than him, but years of addiction had just hollowed me out, stolen all my strength. He was overpowering me. As we're struggling, I lose my balance, I'm falling, and that's when my eyes catch something. Something was sticking out from under the bed. It was a human foot, and my blood just turned to ice. I forced myself to really look under the bed, and my entire world just stopped. There was a young man, maybe just a kid, lying there, totally motionless. His face was this pale, waxy white. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and his lips were the sick, awful shade of blue. And that foul smell, it hit me like a physical blow. It was him. It was the smell of his corpse. I gagged, and bile just shot up into my throat. I don't know where it came from, but this surge of pure primal adrenaline, a strength I hadn't felt in years, just shot through my whole body. As George stumbled, trying to get up, I put every last ounce of that strength into one punch, right to his face. He went down, and I bolted. I didn't think, I just ran. Out of that room, down those stairs, and out of that house of death, and I never, ever looked back. Somehow, I made it back to my own miserable apartment. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I called the police. I didn't give my name, nothing. I just gave them George's address, told them to check the upstairs bedroom, told them I thought there might have been a murder. And sure enough, the next day, it was all over the news. The police had arrested a man named George Scott. The victim was an 18-year-old boy, dead from a suspected OD. At the scene, they found heroin, sex toys, and evidence that there had been multiple victims. That dignified man in that beautiful house, he was a monster, preying on addicts, the weakest people he could possibly find. That horrifying Christmas night, it wasn't just a wake-up call, it was like being thrown into a frozen lake. The disgust I felt for George was huge, but it was nothing compared to the disgust I felt for myself, for what I'd become, so desperate for a fix that I literally walked right into a monster's trap. And I almost sold my body, maybe even my life, for a few grams of dust. You know, seeing that boy's body, that wasn't just hitting rock bottom. That was crashing straight through the floor and into a darkness I didn't even know could exist. And in that darkness, for the first time in a very long time, something inside me shifted. The fear of death, the fear of losing that last tiny shred of myself, it finally became stronger than my fear of being sick. That night was the beginning of the end, and in a weird way, a new beginning. I started on that long, brutal road to recovery, and it was, without a doubt, the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than any withdrawal. But I just kept picturing that boy, and now I've been clean for almost 3 years. Look, I'm not telling you this story because I want your pity. I'm telling you this as a warning.
To anyone out there who's even a little bit curious, who thinks, oh, I'll just try it once, please trust me. Heroin is never just once. It's a one-way ticket to destruction. It will take every single thing you love, and it will never, ever give anything back. If this story from the darkness stayed with you, please like and subscribe. There are many more stories from the edge that need to be heard. Some stories don't feel like stories at all. They feel like warnings, whispered from the dark just for you. This is one of those. So lean in close and listen, because this is about a man who found the perfect house, a house chosen specifically for the secrets it could help him bury. So my husband and I, we found what we thought was the perfect house last December. You know the kind, tucked away in a quiet New Jersey suburb, 3 bedrooms, big backyard. And the price? Honestly, it seemed way too good to be true. It was meant to be our fresh start, but our new home had a secret. And that secret, well, it had a smell. At first, it was barely there, just this faint, kind of metallic odor. I figured, okay, old pipes, maybe, but every day it got stronger, more rotten. I looked everywhere, tore the place apart, but I couldn't find a thing. My husband, always swamped with work, he just brushed it off. So it was just me, alone in the house with that growing stench. I was getting desperate. We didn't know anyone in town yet, so I did something. Well, looking back, it was incredibly naive. I hopped on to a local community forum, described the smell, and then I posted our exact address, asking if anyone had any ideas. Oh, the replies came in fast. All right, but they weren't helpful tips. They were warnings. People telling me the history of my quote-unquote perfect new home. See, 3 years ago, a man who lived right there, he murdered his wife and his son. He buried their bodies in the backyard. And the only reason anyone ever found out? The neighbors started complaining about a strange smell. My hands were actually shaking as I shut my laptop, and this one question just started hammering in my head, this cold, sharp spike of fear. He had been so good at negotiating the price down. Could he have known? Is that why we got such a good deal? I tried so hard to find another explanation, I really did. I found a homeless man, Terry, who'd been squatting in our shed. The police came and took him away, but that awful, rotten, fishy smell, it stayed. We even had a priest come and perform an exorcism. And for about a week, it actually worked. The air was clean. I remember thinking, finally, it's over. But then it came back, and this time it was way worse, like something was actively rotting inside the house itself. And that's when a new problem started. The power would just cut out, completely random. We had electricians come, they couldn't find anything wrong with the wiring. So one afternoon, I'm home all by myself when, boom, the power goes out completely. The whole house just goes dark and dead silent. The circuit breaker was in my husband's office, a room I almost never went into. I didn't have a choice. I had to go in there. The second I opened that door, this blast of freezing cold air just hit me. And the smell, oh my God, the smell. It was the strongest it had ever been. It was coming from inside his office. My eyes followed the smell, and they landed on this huge cabinet against the wall that I'd somehow never really noticed before. It wasn't for filing papers. I reached out and touched it. The surface was ice-cold metal. I realized what it was, a deep freezer. Why on earth would he need a deep freezer in his office? I opened it, and inside, wrapped in clear plastic, was something small. It took my brain a solid few seconds to even understand what I was looking at. Pale skin, eyes closed shut. It was a baby. I slammed the lid shut, and I just ran. I threw up in the bathroom until there was nothing left inside me. Every single instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to just get out of that house and never, ever look back. But there was another part of me, a part that had to know the whole horrible truth. It pulled me right back into that cold, dark, stinking office. I went over and I opened his computer. It didn't take long to find it, a simple text file. And inside, a list. 5 women's names. Next to them, dates, and a few short notes. My eyes scanned down the list, and then they just froze. The last name, the most recent one, was Maya.
my new neighbor, the friendly woman who had just been over for coffee. And next to her name, one word that explained everything: pregnant. And in that one sickening moment, it all just clicked into place. The power outages, they were causing the freezer to fail just enough for the smell to escape. The house's history wasn't a problem for him, it was a feature. It was the perfect cover story. He hadn't just found this house, he had sought it out. This was all part of his monstrous plan. You know, panic, it's a luxury you just can't afford in a moment like that. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that if I confronted him, I would be dead. I had to act like nothing was wrong. I had to be just as cold and just as calculating as he was. I carefully wiped my fingerprints off the freezer and the computer. Then I picked up my phone and sent him the most normal text I could manage. Feeling better, going to run some errands. He replied with a smiling emoji. I got in my car, but I didn't drive to the store. I drove to a busy highway rest stop, and from a payphone, I called the state police, and I told them everything. About 30 minutes later, the longest 30 minutes of my entire life, my phone rang. It was the police. They had him. When they stormed the house, he was in the middle of trying to move the freezer. The days that followed were a blur. I just remember sitting in these cold, sterile rooms at the police station and learning the full, unbelievable scope of the nightmare I had been living inside. They started digging up the backyard. I wasn't there, thank God, but they told me what they found. It wasn't just the remains of the family from 3 years ago. No, they found two more infant bodies buried in the soil right under my garden. And that list from his computer, the 5 women, including Maya, they were all people he knew. And the police confirmed it. Every single one of them had vanished without a trace shortly after telling him they were pregnant. He'd been doing this for years. The perfect house, our fresh start. It was a tomb. I'd been sleeping there, eating my meals there, living my life right on top of a mass grave, created by the man I had married. I filed for divorce immediately. I changed my name, I moved to a completely different state, and never, ever looked back. I got out with my life, but some wounds, they just don't heal. The memory of that house and that smell and the man I thought I knew, those are permanent. Some houses hold secrets that should really stay buried forever. If this story sent a chill down your spine, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more stories that we pull from the absolute darkest corners of the web. You never know what's hiding just beneath the surface.